I came across a little story by a Tibetan Buddhist a few days ago, and I wanted to share what I read with you before I start the talk this morning. It reminded me in a very simplistic sense of, you know, that old phrase, you cannot tell a book by its cover. You understand when I read this to you. Once, two Tibetan monks traveling on pilgrimage came to a rushing river. There they saw an ugly old leper woman sitting on the bank, begging alms. When the monks approached, the woman begged the priestly pair to assist her in crossing the river. One monk instinctively felt revulsion. Disgusted, he gathered his long, flowing monastic robes about himself and waded into the river on his own, soon to reach the other side. There, he wondered if he would even bother to wait for his tardy friend. Being unsure as to whether or not the other monk would abandon the leper or wish to continue traveling on with her alongside. But the second monk felt sorry for the this is so funny, I'm sorry, the decrepit old hag. And compassion naturally blossomed in his heart. He picked up the leprous creature, hoisted her onto his back, and struggled down the riverbank and into the swirling current. Naturally enough, his brother monk had safely reached the far side long before the heavily laden lama, bearing his dirty bundle of rags and bones, even reached midstream. Then an amazing thing happened. At midstream, just where the going seemed to be becoming most difficult, the muddy water boiling about his thighs and his water-logged woolen robes, flowing out like sails, the kindly monk suddenly, miraculously, it seemed, felt that the burden was lifted from his back. Looking up, he saw the female Buddha herself, soaring gracefully overhead, reaching down to draw him up to paradise with her. The first monk, greatly chastened, having been so directly instructed in the nature of both compassion and illusory form, had to continue alone on his pilgrimage. Isn't that powerful? It really struck a chord. This morning I'm going to be talking about channeling your higher self. It's a tricky title, you know. It really is a simple talk this morning. It is also very beautiful and outrageously practical. And as I was putting it together, the talk together this morning, it was also a little embarrassing. Because why? Typically, we channel our personality. You know, we channel our intellectual knowledge. We channel our filtering system, how we see things, perceive things, conclude things. We channel our opinions. And in that strong stream of channeling information, we no longer have contact with self, capital S, self. So as you hear the words this morning, you, like myself, may be a little embarrassed, realizing this great opportunity we have to tune into this great energy we have called self. Even though it takes effort, and it takes struggle, and it takes striving, and it takes meditation, it's free. It costs us nothing. And the benefits are better than a 12% interest based on your annual stock, investment. So it's really worth to thinking about. So even though the talk is very simple this morning, to apply it is something to remember. To channel means to transmit, to communicate, to transmit the ideas, energies, and beauty of our true self, our higher self. But to engage in this kind of channeling, this kind of transmission, we have to have self. So it cannot be assumed. For example, to assume because we have read all 17 books of Agni Yoga, or we have studied all of the blue books, or we have gone through the secret doctrine with 5-star, results, we cannot assume we are yet communicating through the self. Oftentimes, having great knowledge cuts us off from application. We forget to assimilate, or we are so laden with knowledge that we don't know what to do with it. It's like that old statement, information overload. And our ego defaults into thinking, well, I have all this information. I have all this knowledge. That makes me as great as those who wrote, these wonderful, wonderful books. So I told you this was simple, but it's important to remind ourselves not to get caught up in vanity, not to get caught up in ego, which results in the lack of our striving. And why else did we incarnate if it was not to evolve? So to evolve requires striving. To evolve requires transformation. And if we're lucky, we will bring us forward to the road of transfiguration. And once we move into that environment, that sphere of transfiguration, our life will never be the same. We'll never be immersed in transmitting personality issues, filter system based on the dust of the past. So let us remember the purpose of our incarnation simply means to evolve. And we can evolve much more rapidly by being here in a form rather than formless. We are told that once we reach the initiation of transfiguration, then we can continue to evolve in a formless state of consciousness, but not until then. Many people do not have self. They have bodies, they have emotions, they have mind, and they even have a personality unit, but they do not yet have self. They have millions of little eyes, and that's where we get in trouble. We have all these millions of little eyes. We have our glamours and illusions and wishes and desires, which operate as eyes. And the scary thing is that when we have glamours, we not only have our own little eyes, we have the eyes of entities. I mean, to me that is very scary. We understand that a strong desire, for example, gives way to a glamour. And a glamour is ensouled by other entities that keep that glamour alive, which attach to a particular center, usually our sacral center or our solar plexus, which empowers us or empowers the glamour. So we not only have our own little eyes, we have the eyes perhaps that have come as a result of the attachment of entities. Should I go on? Yes. The stomach is their I. Or they say, I want to eat, so their stomach is their I. I want to be famous. Who is that I? The I is our glamours, our desires, and so forth. The real I, the real self, is us. The consciousness unit within us. The teaching wants us to develop that axis within ourselves, around which our personality and life is going to revolve. But if our life is revolving around petty things, and we think those petty things are who we are, this little I, then we're not channeling our higher self. I think we can all attest to the distractions in life. They're so huge. Everything from food to technology to the media to our problems to crises in our life become so consuming. We become absorbed in this consumption process. And in this consumption process, once again, we lose this consciousness unit called the self and become what we identify with. So let's say that we have a health issue and it's frightening, and the doctor inflates that frightening process. Pretty soon we become that fear. And then we transmit or communicate that fear into everything that we do, what we feel, how we act, how we walk, what we eat, what we do with our day-to-day life. Totally eliminating this great potential that we were born with, called self. Self is greater than any doctor's diagnosis, is greater than any problem, is greater than any crisis. We have to learn how to communicate and transmit the self. So how do we do this? By creating a center within ourselves. At the center is the self. Now, this self has self-confidence. Isn't this interesting? See how simple this is? It's just so great. It's so simple. It's absolutely outrageously beautiful. So at the center is the self that has self-confidence, which means now we know. We are capable of doing things, saying things, and thinking things in the original, not imitation. Not to say, well, my doctor said I have 3 months left to live. Now you're placing the doctor in the diagnosis ahead of the self. It's like saying, to me, it's like saying the doctor has more power than God. It means that if the doctor says this is the way it is, then it negates all the supramundane powers that we have the potential of becoming and living and expressing. When we create this magnificent center within us, it is then all that we think, all that we speak, all that we do comes from self-confidence. See, not pseudo-confidence, self-confidence. We are no longer communicating from that false self, from our body, our emotions, our fear, our mind. We are beyond that. We are the self which makes us the Lord of these things. So you really have to believe in this. You know, you have to assimilate it and believe it and know its truth. Don't just parrot the words of the teaching, but become the experience. One day a Hindu man was speaking about courage. His voice and body were shaking as he was talking about courage. And he was saying, we must have courage. No, this is the way he was doing it. We must have courage. If we do not have courage, we can't do anything. Well, that really was inspiring. So the idea is that if we really have courage, we're going to talk like a person who has courage through self-confidence. He did not have courage. He didn't shout a little bit. He didn't use gestures of courage. Now let's say you're a businessman and that you're going to the bank and you're going to sell your next great idea or this wonderful vision to the president of the bank. And you go in like a little mouse, you're not dressed well, you have a weak voice, and you say, I would like $250 million because I have a great vision. The president will say, there's a teller over here. You're welcome to go talk to the teller. I don't have time to speak to you. But if that man comes in dressed with a beautiful silk suit and tie and great shirt, and he has a portfolio with him, and he shows a successful life, what's the difference going to be? He's going to get that money. We must believe at all times that whatever we say and do and think is right. Even something as simple as, you know, like Richard reading the verse this morning. If he believed in what he was reading, he's going to read with confidence. If he doesn't believe what he's reading, he's going to read in a very soft voice. So how did you read? You don't have to answer that with confidence, right? I know. If a business person does not have confidence in himself, he's going to lose his position. He must at all times believe that whatever he is doing is right. Things will become successful because righteousness. So this is what right means. Righteousness, rightness is the beginning of every success. If you are wrong or if you are lying, self-confidence evaporates because these eat your energy and divide your personality bodies, physical, emotional, mental bodies, from each other, and then we become weakened. If we believe that we have this divine presence in our heart and in our mind, and that we are a spark of light within a greater, or a point of light within a greater light, we're going to be right. We're going to have confidence. We're going to be strong. And when we turn on some media source and it says, trying to place a fear of the Old Testament in us, let's say, that terrorism is now taking over the world, and you shut your doors and you no longer walk outside into the sun, then you're saying that the earthly life is more powerful than the supermundane. So we have to remind ourselves every day, in the days that we're living right now, this is, first of all, it's transitory. Secondly, it's false. And third, we're greater than the news. We're greater than terrorists. No, because we are a point of light within a greater light. When you have self-confidence, you can communicate with people. How do you communicate soul to soul? Most people talk body to body, emotions to emotions, or mind to mind. Self-confidence is a sign of being a soul. It means that we can talk to the soul of others. I think of a few stories that I've shared in the past with Torkim, but one of them comes to mind. When the Aquarian Educational Group was celebrating one of their anniversaries, and early on, and I went to the anniversary, and we had the anniversary in the old ashram. And at the end of our eating dinner, he had us go around the table, which was like in a sort of a square formation, telling everybody what they had learned about the day and their experiences and so forth. So it came to me, and I didn't have to say a thing. Torkim started talking, and he said, she and I were talking soul to soul today, and this is what she told me. She has fears, she has this, she has that, and I'm getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And it's like, what does he mean? He never even talked to me today. So, a few years later, I know what it means to talk soul to soul. When you are engaged with one another at dinner and you see someone is suffering, your personalities can be conversing with one another, but let you communicate soul to soul. Or maybe we could even say self to self. So as the personalities are making simple conversation, the soul is talking to one another, about greatness and about vision and about the future and how wonderful life is, and so forth. But if we are talking to their body, to their emotion, to their mind, there are so many things in their nature that's going to oppose our proposal, your proposal. I was thinking, this is a little ad here, I was thinking, we just put forth an announcement about the book we're just getting ready to publish, called My Teachers, Meeting with the Rourkes. We've been working on this book for about three and a half years. So it will be released about mid-February. And I had put a little quote in this forum that I belong to of all Agni Yoga students from all over the world. And I was so excited. I knew they would just be so excited to, hear the news and to read the quote out of the book. And I got a critical response in English and in Russian, and it was in red. To add to the intensity of the criticism. And there was a word that hadn't been capitalized. And so they suggested that I send the whole book back to the translator and then hire an editor to go through the book as if we didn't know what we were doing, because of one little word. And I thought, wow, that's personality to personality. The content of the quote was absolutely 100% from the supermundane, given by Helena Rourke and the Master. And all that person could see is that we did a little h instead of a capital H for him. And I thought that was an outrageous example of where the consciousness, mass consciousness of society is today. We're all, master critics. And we've lost sight of the beauty of life. So I hope he's watching this, which will go on YouTube. And I'll hear, and he signed it Well Wisher. He didn't even give me his name. I tell you, life is so interesting. So, soul to soul, we are going to go to their center and talk to the self of others. You cannot talk to that self until you become self. Or you try to be a self, or you strive to be a self, or you actualize a little bit of selfhood. If it is your soul that is dominating the consciousness unit, then it is operating all of us. Our physical body, our emotions, our thinking, our reasoning, our relationships. And we feel so happy, and this is why. The soul electrically fills our mind. Our mind operates optimally if our emotions and our body is controlled by our self-confidence. Think about that. Why does the teaching teach us self-confidence? Unless we become a self-confident person on our level and strive to higher levels, we're useless. And, respectfully, there are so many useless people in the world today. Let us not be one of them. We become useless if we are not channeling our higher self and releasing our inner potential. So to call someone useless is a scientific fact. It's not a personality, I don't like you statement. Hey, it is saying, why aren't you using and developing and releasing that God-given inner potential that you were born with? Such a person is like they're living and acting from downstairs, maybe even from the basement, in physical, emotional, and mental levels. So we must have a breakthrough wherever we are in consciousness. We're at the first of the year. We have 12 months ahead of us. Let's set a goal that leads us to having a breakthrough. If we read the biographies of a few successful presidents or even businessmen, you will see that in all their actions, there is self-confidence. When we look at our recent president in power now, where would he be if he didn't have self-confidence? Self-confidence evokes power. When you are self-confident, people feel, they sense that you are powerful. They lean on you. When the self is there, when the confidence is there, you are aligning with that source of light and love and power. Releasing these energies in your actions and emotions and thoughts. The more we experience this, the more we exercise the releasing of this electrical energy, this source of light, the more powerful we become in a very transformational way. Not in an egotistical way, not in a vanity way, but in a transformational way. We become for those around us a source of power. If you talk about something, they're going to take it very seriously because it is coming from serious sources and not from your body, emotions, or mind. So this well-wisher, where do you think that person was coming from after reading the words of a great soul? So, you didn't capitalize. On one hand, I was grateful because we immediately corrected it, but there's 633 some pages. Do you know how many thousands of words that go in that? Anyway, not that I'm harboring on it or anything. What is the difference between vanity and self-confidence? Vanity is a pseudo self-confidence. We think we are something, but we are not. We think we know everything, and that we can do everything, and that we have everything, but we do not. It's just the opposite. It's a pseudo self-confidence. Here's a story that I read from the teaching as an example. To hunt elephants in India, the hunters have a trick. The elephants sleep by leaning on trees or leaning on walls. The hunters then put up false walls, and when the poor elephant comes, he leans on the wall, and his forelegs go up in the air, and he's caught. See, vanity is like a false wall. We lean on it, and if we lean on it, we're going to fall in such a way that we're not going to be able to stand up. When does self-confidence begin to build in us? The answer is whenever we achieve a victory with right means and welcome the difficulty. This is when self-confidence increases. So we start at childhood, as parents with our children, giving them experiences that will help them build self-confidence. I remember as a child, I was a musician for a gazillion years, and as a little girl, I played the violin, and I was very skinny and very tiny, and it is not a big, burly, kind of confident-looking person. And I practiced and practiced and practiced, and I had a goal. When I was in high school, I wanted to be a concert mistress. And I was, after all of those years of working for it and, not going out and playing with the rest of the kids, always home, playing and practicing. But look at what that did. It wasn't that I was the greatest violinist, but I achieved self-confidence, knowing what I could do and accomplished it. So that's why we want to challenge ourselves. We don't want to give in and say, I can't do that. Even if you accept that challenge and only meet a fourth of what others can do, it's going to build your self-confidence because you accomplished that much, as opposed to saying, yeah, I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. He who has doubts about himself turns into a dangerous person. He cannot carry on his duties and responsibilities and refuses to give to us in the most critical time in order to save his own skin or out of self-interest. It's something to really think about. Self-doubt stops our progress on the path. So actually the path is formed by, the path we're on, is formed by precious stones of courage and daring and striving toward the future. Self-doubt is the result of cleavages existing in our personality, between our personality vehicles and our higher self. There was a doctor of philosophy with 9 diplomas, but he had no self-confidence. He could not give a lecture because all his knowledge was artificially accumulated in him. So it was like he had all the blue books, on the shelf behind him, and he had read them all, and he had memorized quotes. And then in the next shelf up, he had the Agni Yoga, books, including Super Mundane 1, 2, 3, and 4, so, and then he was televised, so you could see all these great books behind him. But he couldn't lecture because the knowledge he had read was artificially accumulated in him. He didn't understand, in other words, anything that he read, and he didn't understand it because he didn't try it out. There was no transformation, in other words. If you want to develop self-confidence, try to create obstacles. Or rather, try to see your obstacles, because most of us do have some, and conquer them. If you are running a half a mile in 8 minutes, make it 7, make it 5, make it 3, make it 2, make it 1, or make it 55 seconds. I received an email from a coworker this morning, and I was up fairly early for being in Phoenix all day yesterday. And anyway, I was reading through the email, and she said, well, my dog and I took a hike this morning. We only ran 5.5 to 6 miles. Imagine that, only. Quote, I only ran 5.5 or 6 miles this morning. Okay, I'm going to challenge her and see how long it took her. Probably not 54 seconds. Every time we are conquering something, we are developing this sense of self-confidence. This is an achievement, and we also say it's an attainment. Whenever we become successful in organizing or managing or building, our self-confidence is in the process of building. We can even take the example of this book that we're publishing. This is probably the 4th or 5th or 6th or 7th book we've published, but this has been the most challenging. A big book like this, 600, and we're not quite sure of the page count yet, about 633 pages, or let's round it off and say 640 pages. Translating from Russian into English is the first major challenge. And then all the research that's required to make sure that all the facts and information were correct, and bringing it up to date, a language that we can understand and realize. And it took a whole team of people working together, updating our skills on indexing. Now we're ready to go on to a bigger book. Well, it will take a month or 2 off to rest. But it does build self-confidence, in all of us. Self-confidence has many shades and many angles, many sides. Eventually, we're going to see that multiplicity that is called self-confidence for our success, for our health, and for our happiness. Self-confident people have deep faith in the divine. If you had this in front of you, you could highlight it in yellow the way I did. So in your mind, highlight this in yellow. Self-confident people have deep faith in the divine, in the invisible powers, because their self-confident atmosphere is magnetic to divine help. That is why we say, have faith. Faith moves mountains. Christ heard someone say, thank you for healing me. Christ turned back and he said, it was your faith that healed you. Your faith healed you because faith is self-confidence. You have faith in yourself. If you have faith in yourself, you have self-confidence. When you have faith, you are opening a door to your higher self. There was a woman who had breast cancer, and the doctor said, we're going to operate on you. She went home and saw her 3 children and said, I cannot die. It is impossible. I cannot accept this sickness. It is impossible. I cannot accept it. I have work to do for these 3 children. I do not want this sickness. 2 days later, the cancer was gone because she forgot herself. She forgot herself for the children. And she commanded, body, you are my servant. You are going to listen to me today. The self. This is self-confidence. She was channeling the higher self. Self-confidence increases when we are sure that our intentions and motives are only to serve and to help. The most successful people are those people who make the lives of others rich and prosperous and beautiful. In self-confidence, you know that your systems are in good condition. I love that. I just love that. Your systems are in good condition. Your systems are everything that you are using for some goal. So for the book, our systems comprise of about 8 people whose systems are all in good order. Many years ago, before I did any amount of lecturing, I was invited to speak to over 100 people on a subject that I knew quite a bit about, which was esoteric astrology. But the audience had a reputation of standing up in the middle of a person's lecture and arguing with the speaker if they didn't like, what he or she said. Well, I was scared to death. I mean, I was so scared my knees were knocking, literally. And even though I had the confidence in my knowledge, it was, all these stories that after they invited me to speak and I agreed to speak, and then I started hearing stories from the people that were in that audience, earlier audiences. Oh my God, what have I agreed to? And so what I did is I took 4 confident people with me and I planted them in the front row. And we were just streaming back and forth, this, energy of confidence. Not one person stood up during the whole 2.5 hours. It was a very long talk. We had a break in between. So if you need a little help, it works too. It is so important. We must know that our emotional systems are good and that our mental body is organized and cultivated to the degree that it is going to be able to answer questions and problems and solve them. So think about the lecture this morning. Think about self-confidence. Even think about the story, about the Tibetan Buddhist story, about the bad monk, self-centered monk, the monk that was controlled by his personality, and that monk that saw beyond into that incredible female Buddha. And actually that female Buddha had a name which I didn't speak because I don't know how to pronounce it. I can give it to you. It's Vajra. Vajra. I didn't want to hash it up. So imagine, it's like that we've heard stories about this one story where this ragged old man came to the front door of a cottage where there was a big party, right? And the owner of the cottage wouldn't let the man in because he looked so horrible. He was dressed so horribly. And so the horribly dressed man left, and later the owner of the cottage realized who it was and went out to try to find him, and he was gone. It was Christ. So just be safe and treat everybody as a Buddha or a Christ. Okay, so that's the lecture this morning.